Hello and welcome back to Speed Demon Painting. Exciting news as Armoured Clash was announced by Warcradle Studios as their next game coming in 2024. If you're one of those people who has been following Warcradle Studios for a while, you'll know what this means, but this video is very much aimed at people who are going, Armoured what now? With this cheeky little announcement, they basically showed that they will be doing this game in 2024, a new game set at a 10 to 12mm scale, also known as 1/160th. Even though it is a new scale, it will still be set in the Dystopian Age, meaning it is the same setting as, of course, Dystopian Wars, but also Wild West Exodus, Mythos, and when that time comes around, Lost World Exodus. The big focus is more on land warfare with this game though. It will still have other units such as flyers, rollers and hovercraft, but it will mostly be a pure treadhead sort of game with lots and lots of tanks and potentially some infantry fighting vehicles as well, but you will also see some more esoteric units such as walkers and big bases filled with infantry. The big idea is of course to link up your games of Dystopian Wars, which is a naval setting at sea, with Armoured Clash, which basically takes the combat onto land. You don't even need to link it up with your Dystopian Wars games, but it's just fun that you can now, because this game has both a footing in Wild West Exodus and Dystopian Legions, which is an old game made by Spartan Games back when that one existed, which was a 28mm setting. The first predecessor of this game is pretty much Dystopian Legions, which is, like I said, an old game from Spartan Games, which was way back when the internet resolution of pictures had to be quite low, as you can clearly see here, or it would take ages to load, so apologies for not finding a better picture. But this is pretty much the tank that they've used as well in their announcement from Warcradle Studios. And in case you didn't know, this is a Keho ironclad belonging to the Empire of the Blazing Sun, and the Empire in Dystopian Wars are of course sort of the spiritual successors of the old Spartan Games days. The Dystopian Age came about as a fusion of both those old Spartan games, Dystopian Legions and Dystopian Wars miniatures, but also Outlaw miniatures Wild West Exodus. Outlaw miniatures also had larger tank models, back in full resin blocks I might add, in this case of the Rolling Thunder tank shown in the background here, and they actually plan on reusing that one because about 5 years ago Warcradle Studios did make some presentations about what they were planning to do with Armoured Clash. Now, the Dystopian Age very much is the focus of this channel, so if you're interested in learning more about this setting, learning more about the developments that they are making in this setting, make sure you hit the thumbs up on this video and subscribe to the channel for any future videos about the Dystopian Age. Some of the earliest sketches about the Rolling Thunder medium battle tank were made, and it pretty much showed them at the scale you can expect them at this new 10mm scale, or 1/160th. These styles of tanks were used back in the days in Dystopian Wars when it still belonged to Spartan Games. However, there was something always quite off with them, because in order to have this size of a tank in a 2mm or 1/1200 scale that we know of in Dystopian Wars, the tank pretty much would have to be the size of a warehouse instead of an actual tank, which is why the decision was made to split the game up into a sea-based game, the Dystopian Wars, and then a land-based game called Armoured Clash. Now, these things do not live on their own. It's pretty much the same 8 factions, the big 8 factions from Dystopian Wars, that will be used in Armoured Clash to fight on land. You will see a pretty heavy influence from Wild West Exodus when we're talking about the Union, because a lot of the tanks that we see in them were used in the Union setting before. However, units from Dystopian Wars themselves are not really planned for this game, as they would be far too large to actually exist on the table, and you would be talking about models being well over 12 to 30 inches long, which is just not feasible. However, some of the tokens tokens that you know from Dystopian Wars, such as the SRS tokens, are perfectly viable to make in a 1/160th scale, so expect them to see them showing up in this game in Armoured Clash. One such example, which was shown almost 5 years ago now, has recently shown up in Dystopian Wars. In Dystopian Wars we finally have the ground assault tokens, which are made up of these ironhide generic infantry fighting vehicles that are used by all nations, and there was actually a pretty much a bigger scale version of that one shown 5 years ago. But do not expect it to just be an upscaled version of the tokens though. There are going to be entirely new units in there, such as this example of a Crown Cromwell class tank, which is a slightly heavier tank that will be showing up in this game, and that isn't shown at all in Dystopian Wars, mostly because, well, the scale would have been off. The idea very much is to let the ships be the heroes of Dystopian Wars and then let the tanks and the land vehicles be the stars of the show in Armoured Clash, essentially. Now, if you go digging around for old pictures, you will find quite a bit of artwork, but do not expect these new units in Armoured Clash to be carbon copies of the old games. There's a few examples of this one, for instance from the Minsk tank belonging to the Commonwealth. The old Minsk tank was pretty barren of details on the front, whereas the new one will have a lot of lavish details, which very much refers back to all of the Russian ships that you can find in Dystopian Wars, bringing the ranges visually closer to each other than they have been before. But I'm not exactly fully in the know about any of this though. It might change quite a lot. I mean, there have been a few significant changes in the past as well, with sketch artwork in Dystopian Wars that turned out to be quite different when the final models were released, so take all of this information with a pinch of salt as well. But with a few noticeable exceptions though, most of the times the artwork is a fairly good indicator of what you can expect. This, for instance, is a sketch of the Borodino battleship, which was made by Warcradle Studios over 5 years ago, and about 2 or 3 years later they actually released the Borodino, and with the exception of that back turret, it's pretty much what we ended up with. Warcradle Studios is a much smaller company and is a lot more nimble with their release schedule compared to juggernauts such as Games Workshop, but of course not infinitely so. If you get some art sketchworks ahead of time, it is a very good indicator of the things that are to come. Now, on top of these bits of information, there was also a fact document released that tries to answer some of the big questions that players may have, and I will be going over them in this video as well. Now, ironically, the first question is the one that I've been trying to answer in this video, just what is Armoured Clash? And well, they pretty much say that this is an immersive game, but it is not about individual acts of heroism of a single person, because your average infantryman or woman is or would be represented by a model about 10 to max 12 millimeters tall. The scale is a bit weird. People refer to 1/160th as a 10mm game. However, that would mean that if you know the metric system, that would be a person that is 1m60 tall if it was just 10mm. Now, these people exist, of course, but for our American viewers, that would be a 5'4" person. So probably the infantry will be slightly bigger than 10mm, but not more so than 12mm, as that would be a person being nearly 2 meters tall or 6'8", which is pretty much on the high end of the human line, isn't it? But Warcradle Studios does acknowledge here that it is not so much about the individual soldiers, but rather regiments of infantry, tanks, aircraft, and even mighty land ships, and I'm very much looking forward to those, that are being sent into action as part of a huge army and not so much a skirmish game, which is probably why they ended up choosing for this 10mm scale anyway. During the clash ahead, you will be the general who is in command of the whole thing and making tactical decisions. And so, yeah, don't expect one single tank to win you the day. Your tactical decisions about where you move troops and where you focus your firepower will probably be more important than one heroic dude doing something insane. The second question that they answered is all about where it takes place, and there's actually a few nuggets of extra information in here. They say that Armoured Clash takes place in the Dystopian Age, which is an alternate history setting mainly focused around the years 1860 and 1880s, but of course not the 1860s and 1880s as we know of them today. There will be a campaign set that will give you the tools needed to play in specific conflicts, one of the first ones being the clash between the Crown and the Empire called the Scurrying of Singapore in 1864, and I imagine that is going to be the opening salvo and the first two-player set that is coming out. However, things do not end there, because they do say as well that in the 1860s to 1865s, the American Civil War was raging, which was more commonly known as the Ore War. And in case you don't know, in dystopian wars, the people who have lost the Ore Wars, the Confederates, pretty much fled to countries such as Cuba and aligned themselves with the Latin Alliance. Not so much because they very much line up with their mentality and see themselves as these Latin people, but more so in a case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend as well. So quite interesting. We're going to see some more expansion of the lore as well through this game too, which I'm very much looking forward to. There's a few more explanations as well about the scale of the game, but like I said, that scale, the average person is about 10 millimeters, however you might expect a bit taller, like 11 or 12 millimeters. All in all, it really is just a name. What is more important is the fact that it is 1/160th. If you are new to modeling, that is actually one of the most common scales found in railway modeling. It is referred to as the N scale, and there's an absolute plethora of terrain bits that you can find in this scale, because well, outside of wargaming, there is of course a whole other hobby world such as railway modeling where you can find lots of bits of terrain, especially for oldie worldy types of buildings as well. So definitely check this out if this game piques your interest, and if you're willing to build a table perhaps ahead of time before the game is released. Now, another thing that people will of course ask is whether their old Dystopian Wars miniatures, like I mentioned earlier, the oversized tanks, can be used in Armoured Clash. And this time around they are actually saying that they are going to be avoiding any official counts as list, because it caused a bit of confusion for people who don't realize that the older models aren't part of the forthcoming range at all. For official organized plays, the rules will be designed with the new range of the miniatures produced by Warcradle Studios, but of course if you're just playing a friendly game with your mates and you still have some of the old Dystopian Wars tanks lying around, why not just use them as stand-ins for this new game? As always, it's more important that people actually get around, pick up the game and try to play it, rather than just pushing sales onto people. So if you want to use your older stuff, again, that was overscaled for the new one, go ahead, you probably will be able to, as long as you and your opponent sort of agree and it's sort of obvious what you're using the model for, then there should be no issues. And if you do not know, Warcradle Studios has a tendency to just make all of the rules for their models and the armies available for free, and these are in sort of online documents called Orbats, which are incredibly comparable to what codexes and battle tomes are in a Games Workshop setting. However, again, these are digital documents that you are free to print if you want to. You do not have to, but they are free digital documents that you can just download off their site. In Dystopian Wars, these Orbats are also updated as a living rule set every, well, let's say 6 months or so, just to avoid that typical power creep that you can find in some other companies that are notorious for it, and just so everyone sort of keeps playing at an equal footing, which is why Dystopian Wars was as well received as it was in our local gaming community, to be honest. And then they also answer a question which I have already answered before. is this one set in the same setting? Yes, it is. The idea very much is to give players creative flexibility so they can actually have one game of Dystopian Wars and then let the outcome, the winner of that game, determine what the next game of Armoured Clash will be. And of course, you are free to choose a different faction in Armoured Clash compared to Dystopian Wars, but I'm guessing there will be a distinct advantage if you want to go for linked narrative campaigns to play with the same nation in Armoured Clash as you do in Dystopian Wars. Again, not something that is mandatory, but something that will definitely enhance your gaming experience. And then they try to answer, when can you buy Armoured Clash? Well, they say that the studio is hard at work producing plastic and resin miniatures and a whole host of other supporting material, including, very much so, specific dice for this game, like Dystopian Wars had. And this is nothing to be afraid of because that works really well. And you can see a few different symbols, no clue about what they mean yet, but it does seem quite lovely. And you're going to be able to see the game in stores somewhere around half of 2024, as was pretty much said on the Discord channel. And I'm pretty much saving some of the best stuff for last because they are very much serious about their 10mm setting. The 10mm scale is incredibly comparable, for instance, with Legio Imperialis's 8mm or even Mantic's Warpath, which has a Kickstarter coming out as well. And the Wayland Games website now has some plastic terrain that is available for pre-order, meaning it will be released somewhere in January, because traditionally the Christmas months are sort of where most of the staff is on holidays, and they won't be able to sort of produce them at a high enough rate. So there seems to be quite a high amount of cross-compatibility with the other small-scale mass battles that are coming out in 2024, and at no doubt that will probably be at a much more reasonable cost compared to what you would be paying for any Games Workshop kits, for instance, and they will still be compatible. And I have to say, the Gen 1 plastics that were created by Warcradle were already quite good, but if you see what they have done with the updated, the Gen 2 versions of these, they very much are incredibly compatible with the quality that you find on Games Workshop kits, but at a much more reasonable cost though. This whole set is announced at £60, which is probably quite a bit cheaper than what you would pay for anything from Legio Imperialis officially. Now, being cheap is one thing, but high quality is another, and at Warcradle Studios they really know what they're doing with their plastic kits. This is a fully modular kit which will include 2 different types of plastic sprues, not just 2 plastic sprues, I think it's 6 in grand total, and they will have a lot of different parts on them. Buttresses with caps on them so you can finish it off, different wall sections and wall bases, different roof tiles, parapets, chimney stacks, antennas, turrets, cranes, and also double height and double width walls if you want to, with ramps and larger roofs on these. So it pretty much looks like these kits will be, well, they will go as far as your creativity will go pretty much. And so if you want to get a head start on your table from Armoured Clash, you can pretty much do so if you're getting this kit. On a side note, I think except for a few bits, such as doors or windows, you might have to do a bit of work for it, but I can imagine that you can create some really cool man-made islands from Dystopian, or for Dystopian Wars I should say, with these kits as well. So very much looking forward to see what this will be like, and fingers crossed I might be able to get a preview copy of them as well for review. And even if I'm not getting a preview copy of them, I'm definitely buying this set, so expect a review of these coming up really soon anyway. And if you're looking forward to that, again, a reminder, do all the YouTubey things, hit the thumbs up, the bell notification, and subscribe to the channel so you can see that video when that time comes. That was it for me for today though. I hope you are as excited as I am about Armoured Clash coming up, and yeah, I do hope to see you in the next video. If you've got any more news coming up, I'll be sure to let you know. Until then, bye!